got your worship guide, you can take that out. There's a few blanks there. I tried to, I didn't go quite as extensive as Steve did. Tried to dumb it down a little bit, not for your sake, but because I was the one preparing it, and I'm not that smart. So I made it a little bit shorter there. But we're going to continue our study of Genesis and looking at the life of Abraham and this idea of the spiritual fatherhood, the example that Abraham set and how he is the one who demonstrated faith for us. And so we're going to look today at Genesis 22. So as you turn there and look, and I apologize, I don't know that I'll have all the verses won't be up there necessarily, but I'll read them for you. We're going to look at several places in Genesis 22, and really just delve into this story. A story that's very familiar, but one that is a little bit difficult to understand of why it took place. And the goal for today is I want us to understand a little bit more about faith and maybe how we can grow in our faith. You know, we've talked about, Steve's mentioned this idea of faith and what Abraham demonstrated in his faith and what faith means. And we want to be sure that we are living that out in the same way and that we understand it. And so we need to be growing in that faith. And so I want to look at this great story of Abraham in Genesis 22 and see how his faith was tested and how he was able to pass the test. You know, right now, at least in the school I teach in, it's finals week. And everyone's studying and hoping to pass the test. And it's funny going into it. Suddenly now all the students are asking for tutoring and all this stuff. They're worried because they know it's the moment. It's where they will be proved to be able to pass or not pass. And in a very real way, that's how many events in our life occur. That we have these tests where God isn't trying to tempt us to sin, but is trying to see the evidence of our faith, to see if our faith is true. If you look at the idea of testing that's here, it's to attempt to know the true meaning of true nature of something. And that's what Abraham went through. And so before we read this passage, I want to just share a little bit about myself with you. You may not know this if I don't have any co-workers at my business here. I thought they'd be here. They would stand up and say, yes, this is absolutely you. But my spiritual giftedness is an instigator. I don't know that that's in Romans or 1 Corinthians, but I like to stir the pot a little bit and get people to do things. And so frequently at work, if I'm bored, I'll just turn and try and get someone to do something. Normally not a wise thing that I'm trying to get them to do, you know, just to see. I just want to observe what happens. And I like to talk people into things that maybe I'm not willing to do myself. And as I thought about that, before I came to the school I teach at now, I worked at a church camp for 7 years. And my job was to kind of help manage this team of college students and a few other older adults. I've got to start my recording, sorry. And I got bored one day, and I thought back to whenever I went to church camp. There was this one guy who was a really smart guy, and he was a practical joker, and he got one of those disposable cameras. You remember those? And you had to push and hold down the button for the flash to work and all that stuff. Well, there's some kind of thing in there that works that you can shock people with. And he'd come up and he'd have people say, here, touch this, and he'd shock someone. And so I started thinking, I wonder how he made that. And could this be made into a taser in some way? And they can. And so I looked up instructions on the internet and found, and I got all this stuff. And, so I had this camera that looked like a nice little camera, and then it had two little probes sticking out. And I could go up to someone and shock them. And so I made this, and I was really proud of it. And so I took it to the guy's Bible study that I was leading and said, all right, let's try it. I've got this taser. It works. I've tried it. Look, I did it to a screwdriver, and it left black marks. And I said, so it's good. It's safe. It's perfectly safe. I found the instructions on the internet. Nothing could go wrong. And so I went and tried to go throughout the crowd and maybe instigate people to do this. And everyone said, no, I don't think so. Have you tried it? I said, oh, it's safe. Don't worry about it. Everything's okay. And no one would try it because they all were looking at me and saying, what about you? Have you done it first? I said, no, I'm not stupid. I'm not. It's crazy. Why would I want to do that to myself? And through that and through other things that I've done, I've learned that it's easy for me to say things and say I have faith in it. I didn't think that this would hurt anyone. It's easy for me to say that, but for me to actually put feet to that faith and actually try it myself, do it on someone, I was unwilling to do it because my faith wasn't strong in it. It's easy for us to say things with our mouths, to say we can do something, or things are safe, or I'll go wherever God tells me to go. And then when he says go, we say, well, I don't think so right now. That's the state that we find a lot of, for myself anyways, that's where I find myself, and I think Christianity as a whole, is it's easy to name the name of Christ and to say we're his followers and that we have faith in him, but it's much more difficult to put that, when we're tested, to actually put that faith into action. If you're like me, I often find myself very much like saying that this taser is safe, but there's no way I'm going to use it. There's no way I'm going to actually exercise my faith in that because I don't know. I'm unsure. And so that's where we are, a lot of Christians, that we've trusted in Christ, and we say we want to follow him. We want to do what he commands us to do. We'll go wherever he tells us. We'll give whatever he tells us to do. But when push comes to shove, we say, let me think about it some more. Let me go in a different route maybe. Or I'll do that, but once I build a security net. Once I feel like it's not too much of a leap of faith. And so I want us to look at the story of Abraham and see if that's the mentality we should be having, or instead if the mentality is pretty obvious, is that we should take the leap of faith wherever God tells us to go, that we should go and do that. And so look in Genesis 22, and I want us to read, I won't read the whole passage because we don't want to go through 24 verses all at once here. But starting in verse 1, it says, "Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, 'Abraham.' And he said, 'Here I am.' He said, 'Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I tell you.' So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son. And he split wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to his young men, 'Stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship and return to you.' Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the 2 of them walked on together. Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, 'My father.' And he said, 'Here I am, my son.' And he said, 'Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?' Abraham said, 'God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son.' So the 2 of them walked on together." I don't like this story at all. It's a tough story. And I try and put myself in Abraham's shoes. Can you imagine? We've talked about Abraham and his life. You remember last week Steve mentioned how Abraham was given this promise, and then Abraham said, "Yeah, I don't think it's going to work out that way, so I'm going to create my own plan to fulfill this promise. And so I'm going to have a child and have Ishmael, and that's going to work." And God said, "No, the child will come through you and Sarah, and it will be Isaac, and all the nations will be blessed through him." And so you can imagine now finally Abraham saying, "Yes, this is the son, and he's growing, and God, you fulfilled your promises, and let's see what's going to happen with him." And then God says, "Oh, by the way, Abraham, you know that son, that child of promise? I want you to go and sacrifice him." Can you imagine being an Abraham? What? Hold on. I've got something in my ear. Say that again. I don't think I heard you right, God. You said that you would bless me through this child, and now you want me to sacrifice the child? It's an uncomfortable story. But it all comes back to the first verse there. What does God say here? It came about after these things that God tested Abraham. God didn't say it, but God is doing this. That it's a test. It's to try and see if Abraham is still faithful. He's received the promise, but now will he still be obedient and still live trusting in God, not in some blessing he's received. See that? Isaac has been his blessing, and now it's easy to say, I'm putting all my hope in Isaac, but God doesn't want that. He says, no, I want you to still place your faith in me above all things. And what this did is like it says on the screen, it's showing the true nature of his faith. Showing if it's real, if it's authentic. Because what happens when we go through these testings, it reveals our sincerity. Because it's easy to say, yes, I am a Christian, yes, I will be faithful, and then when we're tested, it's very much more difficult to say, yes, I will go through with this. And I say this, the goal here isn't to come down hard on us as believers and say, we can never do this. But the goal of testing is to promote purity, to come through the fire on the other side to see that, yes, we can be faithful. Often we fail the test, and God says, that's okay, I'm going to pick you back up, and then we are going to do it again and test you until you are faithful, until you continue along in this faith. 1 Peter 1, verses 6 and 7, Peter writes and he says that we should rejoice when we go through the trials of life, because like gold we are being refined. And this results in the praise and glory of God. The desire of these testings isn't to make us feel like we're unworthy, make us feel like we are trash and that we can never please God. The goal of it is to make us come out the other side better and more secure, more confident in our faith. And so when we go through these trials, they test us, they see, it's not to tempt us into sin, it's to test us to see how faithful we will be. I remember a few years ago, I was at the same church. All my illustrations today are from the church camp for some reason. I don't know, it was on my mind. But I was at the camp and I was sweeping a floor, and there was a ring that I found, a gold ring that had what looked like diamonds in it. It looked like a wedding ring. I thought, all right, score, I found a wedding ring. I knew I couldn't, just keep it. We had to find the owner, and we never found the owner. I still have that ring, thinking that someday someone's going to think, oh yeah, that's where I left it, was at camp. But then it's 6 years now, it's never happened. But I have this ring, and I have no idea the value of it, because it's never been tested. That I have it put away thinking, this could be worth $10, it could be worth $1,000. But I don't know, because I haven't tested it. And I know if I take it to a jeweler, they'll look and see, is this gold pure? Are the diamonds real? And they can test them. I could test them. I could get a piece of glass and try and figure out, all the hardness tests and purity. Not to destroy it, but to see the value of it, to see how pure it is, to see how true it is to what it claims to be, which is a gold ring with diamonds. And isn't that how these things in your life work? Where God tests and tries you to see how you will demonstrate your faith. And so if you're like me, many times you come out the other side humbled and saying, my faith was weak. I was thinking about all the examples of times that I've said, God, I want to be faithful. I want to share my faith. And then God puts someone in my week and says, okay, share your faith. And I said, I don't think so. I don't know if I can do that. I remember very clearly one day, I was in high school, or junior high, I believe, and I was praying. It was after Disciple Now week, and I was praying, God, I want to share my faith. I haven't done this like I'm supposed to. Let me share my faith. I have trust in you that it's all going to be okay. And this is the person I want to share my faith with. And then we got on the bus, and I sat next to that individual and thought, oh, look at this. I can share my faith. And so I said, so do you know Jesus? And I tried to exercise my faith a little bit, and then my fear overtook me, and I just dropped the ball and changed the subject, did something else. Thankfully, she came to know the Lord through someone else's witness. But I remember that to this day of praying, and God said, I'm going to let you be faithful. I'm going to let you put feet to your faith. And fear overcame me. And I wonder how many times we're in that place. And so what can we do about that? This message is really not to beat us down, but to say, what can we do as a response to it? And I think we can find a key here. The second point that I want you to see here is really the heart of this. And that is that the perseverance of our faith, our ability to remain faithful, rests on the object of our faith. It rests on the object. What will that object be? Oftentimes we're unwilling to be faithful because we don't trust what we're called to be faithful to. I have faith in this chair, this object of the chair, because I know it's sturdy construction. I don't have faith in this as much because it falls a lot. And that's how our faith works. And Dave, if you'll switch to the next slide. I don't have my little clicker today, so thank you. I want you to see this bottom statement here. It's wordy, but what we understand about what we put our faith in determines how much faith we will demonstrate. What we understand about that object determines how much we're going to put faith in it. At the same church camp, we had a thing called the power pole, or the pamper pole. Have any of you done a high ropes course before? Okay, we had one, and this is the best part about working at camp, is we have all these fun things you could do. And as one of the managers, I could go and watch people. And again, my job was to taunt them and to instigate them into doing something that they otherwise wouldn't have. And I remember my favorite place to be was this pamper pole, because it was hilarious to watch people. And what it was we had a telephone pole, a foot diameter, that went up 30 feet in the air. And the goal was to climb up the pole, had little pegs, and you were strapped into a rope. It was safe. You climb up to it on the top, and then you're supposed to stand on the very top, 30 foot in the air, and then jump out and grab a trapeze. Dave, if you'll advance it one, I've got a couple of pictures of this. So this is the pamper pole. You go up the center one, and there's a little trapeze out there. You see it? Go one more. So this is what you're supposed to do. He's not at the top yet. You can tell he's scared. He's supposed to be one a little bit higher. And then one more slide, Dave. This is what you're supposed to do. Jump out and grab it. It is a petrifying thing to do. And I would stand there, and I remember seeing a lot of the guys in particular, these football players. We'd have FCA camp there. And see these football players go, muscular guys, and they're like, oh, that's easy. It's nothing. And they'd see other people up there, and they'd taunt them and say, come on, just jump. Just stand up there and jump. Quit being a sissy. Just do it. And then it'd be there. We'd say, okay, if you think you're so brave, why don't you do it? And inevitably, these people would climb, and they'd get to that top. And they'd be so scared to put their foot up on the very top and then put the other foot and trust. There's nothing to hold on to at that point and just stand there. And then not only did they have to do that, but then taking that leap and jumping out. Why were they so afraid of it? Because they didn't trust all this stuff. They didn't know if they were really safe. It was scary because they didn't know what if they could drop. What would the results be when they did this? And they were petrified because of the object of their faith. I went up and I was scared at first, and then after a few years I started doing this. And I climbed to the top. I never would stand on the top pole because that still scared me. But I remember getting there and I had no problem jumping out and grabbing the bar. Why? Because I was part of the training. I was part of the setup. I was part of this process of seeing how things are secured and checking the safety. I knew if I missed that trapeze, it was okay. I'd be fine. Because I knew the object. I knew everything was secure. I knew that the guy holding it down below, that he'd be fired if he dropped me. So I knew he wasn't going to drop me. Because I knew the objects that I was placing my faith in. The reason, I submit that the reason that we don't have faith, that we don't exercise our faith and go when God tells us to go, or do what God tells us to do, or give what God tells us to give, is because we don't understand what we're putting our faith in. We don't fully understand who this God is that we're trusting, that we're saying that we trust. And instead, we say, He may be able to handle this, but I'm just not sure if He can. He tells me to sell everything I have and go here, but, what if He's wrong about this? I remember having as some of you know, I teach in a doctor of ministry program, and so I have a bunch of pastors that come, and we talk about some of these ideas and talk about faith and how you're supposed to go where God tells you to go. And I remember one pastor, had been a pastor for 20 years, 20 or 30 years, he said, "But Dr. Meek, it's easy to say that, but I have a family to worry about. If God tells me to go to this church, how can I do that? I've got a family to take care of. I've got children to feed. I've got a mortgage to pay. I can't do that. If he says to go, I need to make sure that my family is going to be secure, make sure that the salary is okay, that everything's going to work out before I make such a bold step." And I said, "You're missing the point. God doesn't want you to worry about the security. He wants you to trust in Him for security." The reason we fail these tests of faith is because we don't know the object of the faith in the way we're supposed to. Remember a few weeks ago, Steve had us listen to a short clip from S.M. Lockridge about who God is. And I encourage you to go back and find that. Just type in Lockridge and God. You remember he talked, I can't do it in his voice or with his power, but he talked about how God is, He's faithful. He's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He's the fortress in whom we can trust. He's all these things. The goal of understanding all about who God is and studying Him is so that we can say, He has never failed. He never will fail. And so because of that, we can step out and take a leap of faith without worry, without concern. And so when we find ourselves struggling with these tests of faith, the question then becomes, where are we putting our faith? What's the object of our faith? And do we know that object in the way we're supposed to? As I thought about this, that God, throughout history, what we have in the Old Testament and the New Testament is God consistently demonstrating His trustworthiness. Has God ever failed to keep a promise? Has God ever changed and let people go on their own? No, time and time again. He says, go and do this. Look at the life of Abraham that we've talked about. This is actually kind of a bookend of the story of Abraham. What was he first told in Genesis 12? He said, go from the land that you're in and go to Canaan, and I'll make you a great nation. And here he's told, go to this mountain and sacrifice. He's told to go. And each time he goes, is God faithful in the promise? Yes. Does He do it in Abraham's time? Does He do it the way Abraham wants? No, not necessarily. But God is faithful in each one of these. Look at why Abraham was able to have this faith. Look at verse 8. When Isaac asks him, where's the sacrifice? What does Abraham respond? He said, God will provide for Himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the two of them walked together. Abraham was willing to be obedient, but he knew this God that he was trusting in. And he said, God's going to provide. I don't know how. I can imagine being Abraham, and in his mind he probably thinks, well, maybe God will provide a lamb. Maybe God will have me kill my son, but He'll bring him back to life. I don't know what God's going to do, but my job isn't to figure out God. My job is to be obedient to God. He knew who God was, and he could make that bold statement that God will provide. And I think about that pastor that I was teaching. And he said, but I've got to create this safety net. I have to have a backup plan. Could that guy say that God will provide? No, he was saying, I can provide, but not God. We've got to know God. Look, continue on in this verse 12. It says, God does provide. So starting in verse 9, it says, then they came to the place which God had told them, and Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. I'm sure that had a little bit different tone to it. Yes, here I am. Stop me. He said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him, for now I know that you fear God, that you respect God. This isn't a fear of God of cowering in the corner and saying, God, you may harm me, I can't do anything. It's saying, God, I know who you are. This test demonstrated that Abraham understood, finally at this end point of his life, he understood that God was so much greater and so much more worthy of reverence and respect and fear than anything else, that he was willing to act and do this, make this greatest of sacrifices possible. Because he understood God. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son for the sake of God. What are you willing to sacrifice? What does your faith show? This is hard for me. I'm a tightwad. I don't know about you, but this whole giving to things, I'm the type. This week, Micaiah came home from school and he had a little note that said, "Oh, he's going on this field trip." You're probably going on the field trip too. I'm like, $25? We have to pay $25 for him to go on a field trip? Where's this thing? What is it all about? I don't want to pay $25 for this. Can we talk about it going? And of course, I didn't do that. My wife pulled me back. She paid without me even knowing. But because we don't want to give. I want to hold my money. And so then it comes around, and I don't want this to be about a money thing, but this is a struggle for me to exercise faith when it comes to finances. And so that's where it touches me. Every Christmas, I think, and I'll tell you, honestly, there's times that I've been obedient and then times that I've said no to God, and that hurts to say that. But whenever Lottie Moon offering comes around and I say, okay, I've been tithing, but now I need to give to these missions and all this stuff going on. I live in a nice house, have nice cars, have food on the table, don't have any problems, and oh God, you said you want me to give this? It's Christmas. I'm giving gifts right now. I don't have that money. I don't think so. You said to give this amount. Let's cut it in half, and I'll give the rest maybe at Annie Armstrong time, or I'll see how this goes. And that's just me. For you, it may be another area of your life. It may be a job situation, or a relationship, or a school, or some other way. But for me, it touched me when it comes to finances for some reason. And I'll tell you, many times I've said, God, I can't. And the reality isn't, God, I can't, it's God, I won't. God, I don't trust you enough right now to do this. Flip over in your Bibles to Hebrews 11, this great faith chapter. I love this and seeing the testimony of these saints before us. But if you look at Hebrews 11 and verse 6, it actually isn't about Abraham here. It's about Enoch. That Hebrews 11:6. I'll start in verse 5 here for you to give some background. It says, by faith Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death. And he was not found because God took him up. For he obtained the witness that before his being taken up, he was pleasing to God. And then listen to this. And without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. You catch that? You come to faith. What do you believe? You believe that he is. It's interesting that the author of Hebrews doesn't say what the object of that is. It's not he is faithful, he is existent, he is supreme. It just says he is. And I tried to search through that and say, what is he is? What's it referring to? There's been a lot of speculation, but I would say it seems like this is going back even to the book of Exodus, where Moses has said, God, what is your name? What is God's name? Yahweh, I am. I am as he is. Do you see the connection there? We're putting our faith in someone who is all things. He's the sustainer. He's the provider. He's the faithful one. He's the worthy one. He's the fulfiller of promises. He is all those things. And because he is, we can say, I will. Because the object of our faith has never fallen. I struggle putting faith in people because people fall. but God doesn't. It's a great fallacy when we equate God with man. God has always come through. And so because of that, we can say, yes, Lord. You can look at missionaries throughout history. I admire these people. Steve and Tammy, they don't make sense to me what they did early on in their marriage. He was a successful business person.
Steve and Tammy?
I said Tammy. I'm looking at Tammy. Tiffany, whatever. Steve and Tammy were not together.
We're all confused now.
All right.
Explain.
Wife swap. They were on the show Wife Swap. No, Steve and Tiffany, I'm sorry.
That's what happened in Camden.
All right.
Bob and Steve.
Let's pray and dismiss. Steve and Tiffany, Steve sold their possessions and he went off to the mission field. Successful business person, then he went into the Amazon. Doesn't make sense to me. And when I look at people like that, I say, what are you thinking? How would you do that? And they're not the only example. All of these people who have gone on the mission field, or even mission trips for that matter, the group right now going to Miami, why would you spend spring break in another place doing work when you could stay here and get stuff done?
Or go to the beach.
Or go to the beach. With everyone else.
Well, Miami is the beach.
It is. There's a good chance that's where they are, but I think it's a great, why do that kind of thing? Because they understand who God is. It makes no sense, according to human standards, to go and to sell all you have and to move to another place. It makes no sense to give up your week to go and do missions. But it does when you understand God and that God provides. I wrote a few things just for me. My faith rests on His existence, on the fact that God is, that He exists and He's there. There is a true God. Faith rests on His character, that He's never lied, He's never deceived, He's never tried to cause harm to us. It rests on His promises. He says He has a plan for us. It says that all things will work together for good, and ultimately He's promised us salvation in Him and that all this will pass away. And it rests on His faithfulness. That when God calls, He fulfills those calls. When He promises things, He comes through with the promises. The object of our faith is worthy of our faith. The last thing I want you to see, through our testing, it reveals our sincerity in our faith. And the object of our faith really is where we put a lot of our trust, and that determines how much faith we will have. But what comes out of this faith, of true faith, is wholehearted, full, complete trust and obedience. It says, I will go, I will do. Staying in Hebrews 11, you see the verse up there, but if you continue on, after Enoch comes Abraham. So listen to what it says. It's Noah and then Abraham. But look in verse 8. Hebrews 11 says, by faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. So he went out, not knowing where he was going. Beginning of his life, he was called to go out. And what did he do? He went out. He did it. He was trusting. Can you imagine leaving all you have and saying, I'm going to go to this other land, this foreign place, and I'm going to plant my life there, and God's going to make me great. Whoopee! No, that he was willing to do that. And so he went to this foreign land. Then it says, by not knowing where he was going, by faith he lived as an alien in the land of promise, in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. He was looking to the future, to the promises of God, to the character of the one who had called him. It says, by faith, even Sarah herself received ability to conceive, even beyond the proper time of life, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, there was born even of one man, and him as good as dead at that, as many descendants as the stars of heaven in number, and as innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. All these died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own, and indeed they had been thinking of that country from which they went out. If they had been thinking of that, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, "In Isaac your descendants shall be called." He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type. By faith, then, Isaac continues to demonstrate this. These people of faith put their faith in action. James 2 tells us that faith without works is what? Dead. Is James telling us that you have to have faith and then you have to work, and together the two of those earn your salvation? No, he's saying if it's true, if it's legitimate faith, if it's faith that has been tested, it will produce works. And so if you say you have faith and there are no works, then your faith isn't true faith. A few weeks ago, I went to a conference. Mike was there as well. That was Russell Moore, the head of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, was presenting on sexuality in the church and talking about homosexual debate and some other issues. And so they're asking questions, and he was asked the question kind of, what do you think of the status? I mean, is everyone, basically they're getting at, is everyone bummed out because American Christianity is going down, or going down the tubes fast? And he said, actually, I'm not. And I thought this was very profound. He said, we're in a better place now than we were 30 years ago. I thought, what? We're not in a better place. I mean, no one's claiming to be Christians anymore. I mean, the church is being attacked. And he said, we're in a better place because now we have Christians that are real Christians, not people who are just Christians by name only. 30 years ago, you had people going to church because they needed a job. And good workers went to church. I mean, it was expected, especially probably 30, 40 years ago, you were expected that if you were a business person, you would be in church on Sunday. It was an avenue to success. And so, and on the census, you better put Christian. That's what everyone put. And so what happened was Christianity was full of a bunch of people that were Christians by name, but not by deed. They weren't true Christian. Their faith wasn't really there. They were just identifying with this. And Russell Moore said, we're in a better place now because no longer are people just claiming Christianity when they're not real Christians. Now we can identify those people who are lost. Before it was more difficult. Now we know that those in the church are probably a little bit more faithful than what they were in the past. And those outside the church, we can say, yeah, instead of you trusting in some promise that you walked an aisle or that you got dunked or that you filled out a card, instead of us just saying, yeah, you're good and you're going to heaven now, we can say, those people are saying, I'm not a believer. We say, that's great. Now we can tell you about what it means to be a believer. What happened in American society is really a testing of the faith, and those who are not true have fallen away. And that larger picture is what happens in our smaller churches, in our smaller lives as well. That we can see what is real faith by what is produced in the actions. For Abraham, it was trust. It was, I'll go wherever you tell me to go, and I will obey whatever you tell me to obey. I get frustrated a lot of times when I hear coworkers at times, and I'll see little lies creep into their conversations. And say, why are you doing that? Well, I have to do that. I have to cover myself. I've got to say this because I don't want this to come back. And I think, do you not see how it's wrong to just say things and try and manipulate things so that you can cover yourself? When God tells us to be honest, to be right, to trust in Him. Look at the history of Israel. I thought fit this perfect. They started by faith with Abraham, and then they went downhill fast. What happens whenever they leave Egypt in the Exodus? And God tells them to go into the land of milk and honey and to conquer the people. What is their response? Too big, right? They're too big. They're giants. We can't conquer them. And so they don't do it. What does God do? He says, 40 years of wandering because you didn't believe I was big enough. You saw that I was big enough by bringing you out of Egypt, but now suddenly you don't think I'm big enough to take care of you whenever the going gets tough. Several years later, they have their first king. Even having a king. Why did they have a king? Because they didn't trust God, that he was big enough. They said, we've got to be like the other nations. In their process with Joshua of conquering the lands. He said, we've got to have an alliance with these people. And God said, no, don't make an alliance. Your alliance is with me. Then Saul comes along and Saul says, I'm going to basically have battle by myself. I'm going to do things on my own. I'm not going to trust in your plan and wait because I think right now we have to go to battle and I can't wait for your prophet to come. And so I'm going to do it all on my own. David is judged at one point for taking a census. This thought, why did he take a census? Because he wanted to know the might of his nation, to see how they would do. Why? Because he was placing his faith in the people around him rather than the God that is supreme. When we understand this God who is great, who is mighty, who is faithful, then the response is that we openly say we trust in you and we rely on all that you are and we will obey you no matter the cost. And so my question for you, and this is the question I have for myself, and this is why this was a very difficult sermon to prepare for me, is will I have that kind of faith? If God demanded something like this of me, where would I wind up? What would that show about the sincerity of my faith? And I'll tell you, I don't know that my faith is strong enough to say I'll go wherever you tell me to go. I'll give whatever you tell me to give. I'll do whatever you ask me to do. So what do I do in response? I need to fall in love with Jesus every day. I need to understand him more. I need to embrace the truths of Scripture and get in such an intimate relationship with him that I say, you are fully trustworthy, and I'll do whatever you tell me to do. You know, Amber and I, just this past week, celebrated 14 years of marriage. And you know who I trust more than anything in this world besides God? It's Amber. I know that she'll be faithful to me. And I know that if I ask her to do something or she says she's going to do it, I know it will get done. I can tell you that every morning I don't worry about my kids being fed or getting ready for school. Why? Because I know that's her character. That's what she does. And I know that she's going to be there and she's going to love me and we're going to have this relationship. Why? Because I'm with her every day and I'm in such an intimate relationship with her that I know what she'll do next. I know what she's done that day. I know that she'll always be faithful. Because I know her because we have an intimate relationship. That's why it's easy. It is not a great exercise in faith. It's not seen to me as some great stretch to say, okay, Amber, do you think you can handle this today? Is it going to get done? Are you going to... No, because I know her. Are you going to be faithful to me today? Are you going to go off and do something crazy? I don't have to worry about that because I know her. Can we say that about God? That we know him in such a way that we say, God, I'll do whatever you ask. Because I trust you that you're going to do what you've told me you're going to do. The key to our faith is the intimacy that we have with God and our way of understanding him. And so, my challenge, my encouragement, and this is what I've taken myself from this as I study this, is that I've got to get in a more intimate relationship with God. And I've got to be willing to trust him when he tells me to act. I've got to build my faith up so when he says to do something, I say, yes, God. What is it? I hope you'll join me in that. I hope that'll be your prayer. I hope this week that will be a challenge you take on, that you want to trust Him. And that you'll look at those times that you struggled with trust and faith. Say, God, you didn't deserve my lack of faith. You deserve so much more. Let's pray together. God, we come to you with humble hearts, knowing that you offered all you had to us. You gave your life so that we might have salvation in you. You've fulfilled all your promises. You've always been there to protect us. You've always provided. And yet somehow we still struggle to place our faith in you. We still feel like we have to build in a safety net. And so, God, we openly confess that this is a struggle. But it's not a place that we want to stay in. We want to live like Abraham lived and have the faith that Abraham demonstrated with the offering of Isaac. So, God, help us to have such an intimate relationship with you, have such deep knowledge of you, and build a lasting relationship with you that we're willing to trust you and not depend on our own resources, on our own might, on our own abilities, but to lay it all before you and say, we will do whatever you desire of us. We will trust in you. We will obey you in all things. So God, I ask that you show us where our faith is weak. And that's a scary prayer, God, but we want something more. We don't want to go through this life on our own. We want to go through it with you. And so show us how we can have more faith. And let us strive for that. When life is easy, God, let us be building our relationship with you so that when life gets tough, when there is times of testing, that we're able to honor you, to glorify you, that you are pleased with our actions because we know you in such a real way and we're obedient to your desires. So help us, encourage us, strengthen us. Let us be a body that comes together and encourages and helps one another. All for your glory, all for your honor, all for your praise. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Let's stand and worship together.